My name is Tori, and I'm 29 years old. 2 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 5 words that shattered everything. I thought I knew about family, love, and belonging. We don't have a seat. The words didn't come with an apology. There was no tremor in her voice. No hint of the emotional labor she always claimed overwhelmed her. It was a flat, clinical statement, like a waiter telling a patron the kitchen had run out of the nightly special. "What do you mean, Mom?" I asked. My hand tightened around my phone, the plastic casing cold against my ear. Outside my apartment window, a light November sleet was beginning to glaze the pavement, turning the world into a gray, slippery blur. "I mean exactly what I said, Tori," Linda replied. I could hear the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of her heels on the hardwood floor, the sound of her being busy, being important. Victoria's in-laws decided to join us last minute. With the kids and their cousins, the dining room is just at capacity. We literally don't have a chair for you. And since you're just down the street in the city, we figured you wouldn't mind staying back. You see us all the time anyway. I didn't see them all the time. I saw them when Victoria needed a babysitter. I saw them when my father, Robert, forgot his password for his iPad. I saw them when there was furniture to be moved or a family emergency that required someone to stay behind and mind the house. "It's Thanksgiving," I whispered. The smell of the pumpkin candle I'd lit earlier, sweet, spicy, and full of a promise that now felt like a lie, cloyed at my throat. "Mom, it's the first one since Grandma passed. I thought we were all—" "Tori, please don't be dramatic," she snapped. The weapon of guilt was unsheathed, sharp and familiar. I am under a tremendous amount of stress trying to make this perfect for Victoria's new family. They are very influential people. You're always so sensitive about these things. Just order some takeout. We'll save you some turkey in a Tupperware. Robert can drop it off on Friday. Is Dad there? There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating silence. I knew he was. I could picture him in his recliner, staring at the news, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on anything that wasn't the conflict happening 2 feet away from him. "He's busy, honey. I have to go. The florist is on the other line." Click. The dial tone was a long, low hum of rejection. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the groceries I'd bought to contribute to the meal. A bag of cranberries, a heavy sack of Yukon Gold potatoes. I was supposed to mash until they were silky and perfect, just the way my father liked them. I walked to the dining table, a small, thrifted thing I'd painted white, and sat down. The silence in my apartment wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that has weight. It felt like it was pressing against my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I was the acceptable sacrifice. In the architecture of my family, Victoria was the spire, glittering, high-reaching, the pride of the skyline. My parents were the foundation, and I was the drywall, functional, necessary to keep the wind out, but meant to be painted over, ignored, and punched through when someone lost their temper. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I remembered Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Victoria had broken up with her soulmate of 3 months. The entire holiday was restructured around her grief. We ate in the living room because she couldn't face the dining table. I spent 4 hours rubbing her back while she sobbed. My own plate of food growing cold and congealed on the coffee table. No one asked if I was hungry. No one asked how my final exams had gone. "Tori is the strong one," Linda would always say. A badge of honor that felt more like a sentence of isolation. She doesn't need the fuss. I stood up and walked to the window. The sleet had turned to snow, big fat flakes swirling in the amber glow of the streetlights. Across the street, I could see into the bistro on the corner. It was glowing with golden light. I saw a group of friends laughing, their breath fogging the glass, a bottle of wine being passed around. They looked like they belonged to each other. I reached out and touched the glass of my own window. It was freezing. Suddenly, the strong one felt very, very tired. I looked at the bag of potatoes on the counter. I thought about Friday, the humiliating ritual of my father pulling up to the curb, handing me a plastic container of leftover, cold turkey through the passenger window like I was a stranger at a soup kitchen, and driving away before the silence became too uncomfortable. Something inside me went quiet. Not sad, not angry, just empty. But as the darkness settled into the corners of my kitchen, something else settled too, a quiet, cold decision I didn't even fully understand yet. If there wasn't a seat for me at their table, I was done begging for the crumbs. The decision didn't feel like a roar. It felt like a door clicking shut. I spent the next 48 hours in a strange, numb trance. I went to my job at the design firm, my fingers moving across the keyboard, creating logos for people I'd never meet, while my mind replayed my mother's voice. "We don't have a seat." On Wednesday evening, the night before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria. "Hey, Mom said you're staying back. Can you send over that recipe for the maple glazed carrots? The ones you did last year? Also, could I borrow your extra set of silver serving spoons? I'll have David swing by and grab them tonight." "No, how are you?" "No, I'm so sorry you can't make it. Just a grocery list and a request for my belongings to decorate a table I wasn't invited to sit at." I looked at the silver spoons, inherited from the grandmother, who had actually loved me. They were wrapped in soft cloth in my buffet drawer. "No," I typed back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never said no to Victoria. "No to the recipe? Lol, why?" she replied almost instantly. "No to the spoons. And I'm busy. Don't send David." I turned my phone face down. The silence that followed was deafening. 10 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. I stared at his name, Dad, until the screen went black. I felt sick. My stomach was a knot of cold lead. To them, my boundary wasn't an act of self-preservation. It was a declaration of war. Thursday morning arrived with a cruel, beautiful clarity. The sun hit the snow, turning the city into a cathedral of crystal and light. I woke up and realized I had nothing to do. No turkey to prep. No heels to squeeze into. No practiced smile to pin onto my face while Linda told the influential in-laws about Victoria's latest promotion, conveniently forgetting that I had designed the entire brand identity for the company Victoria worked for. By 2 p.m., the smell of roasting poultry began to drift through the vents of the apartment building. I sat on my sofa, wrapped in a wool blanket, trying to read. But the words blurred. I was mourning. I wasn't mourning the dinner, I was mourning the version of my parents I had invented in my head to survive. The version that cared. The doorbell rang at 3:15 p.m. My heart leaped. A part of me, the small wounded part, hoped it was my father. I hoped he had finally stood up, put on his coat, and told Linda he wasn't eating until his other daughter was at the table. I ran to the door and checked the peephole. It wasn't my father. It was Marcus. Marcus lived 2 doors down. We'd been hallway. Friends for a year, the kind of friends who swapped packages and complained about the radiator knocking. He was a landscape architect, always smelling faintly of cedar and rain. I opened the door, and the first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh bread and something savory, like rosemary. He was holding a glass dish covered in foil. "I saw you through the bistro window the other night," Marcus said, his voice steady and warm. He didn't ask why I was alone in my pajamas at 3 p.m. on a holiday. "You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world, Tori." "Marcus, my family is in Maine," he interrupted gently. "I was going to do the lonely bachelor steak dinner, but I made way too much stuffing, and I realized I really hate eating stuffing alone." He looked past me into my quiet, dark apartment. He saw the empty table. He saw the unlit candles. "I have a bottle of decent red and a sourdough loaf that's still warm," he said. "Are you busy, or can I tempt you with a side of overseasoned gravy?" I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no pity in his eyes, just an open door. "I don't have anything to give you," I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't cook anything. Marcus reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before gently resting there. The touch was grounding, solid. "You don't have to bring anything, Tori. You just have to bring yourself." I walked back into my apartment to grab a sweater, my eyes stinging. For the first time in 29 years, I didn't have to earn my place at the table. I didn't have to be the strong one or the useful one. But as we walked down the hall toward his place, my phone chimed in my pocket. It was a text from my father. "Tori, your mother is very upset. You're ruining the day for everyone. Just send the recipe and stop this. We'll see you Friday for the leftovers." I sat down at Marcus's small wooden table. He had set 2 places. There was a single yellow rose and a bud vase in the center. The room was filled with the sound of a soft jazz record and the clink of silverware. "You okay?" Marcus asked, pouring the wine. The liquid was a deep, bruised purple. I looked at the text one last time. "Ruining the day." I realized then that in their story, I was always the villain whenever I stopped being the martyr. "I'm fine," I said, and for the first time that day I meant it. I hit block on my father's number. In fact, I think I'm finally starting to see things clearly. I sat in Marcus's apartment as the sun went down, watching the shadows stretch across his floor. My father had a chance to choose me, and he chose silence instead. The dinner with Marcus wasn't a grand cinematic event. There were no sweeping declarations or orchestral swells. It was just the sound of a fork against a plate, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the taste of the best sourdough I had ever had, salty, warm, and honest. For 3 hours, the world outside, the world where I was a drywall, daughter, ceased to exist. Marcus talked about his childhood in Maine, the smell of pine needles, and the way the Atlantic looked when it was angry. He asked me questions, not about my sister, not about my parents' house, but about the art I made when no one was watching. "I saw the sketches you left in the mailroom once," he said, leaning back as the wine glowed like a ruby in his glass. "The ones of the old bridge. You have a way of capturing the loneliness of a structure. It's beautiful, Tori." I felt a heat crawl up my neck. "I didn't think anyone noticed those." "I notice you," he said simply. The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence at my parents' house. I didn't know how to respond to being seen, so I focused on the taste of the bitter coffee he poured after dinner. It was a grounding bitterness, a reminder that I was awake, alive, and for the first time, not performing. But the peace was a fragile bubble. The next morning, Friday, the Tupperware ritual was due to commence. I woke up to 14 missed calls from my mother, and a string of increasingly frantic texts from Victoria. Apparently, the Thanksgiving dinner with the influential in-laws hadn't gone as planned. Without my silver spoons, the table looked cheap, and without my carrot recipe, the side dish had been a mushy disaster. I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun casting long, cold needles of light across the floor. I felt a strange, detached curiosity. They didn't miss me. They missed the labor I provided. At 11 a.m., my buzzer rang. I didn't even have to look at the intercom. I knew the rhythm of that finger. It was my father. I walked to the window and looked down. His silver sedan was idling at the curb, exhaust puffing out into the chilly air. He was standing on the sidewalk, holding a white plastic bag from a local grocery store. Inside, I knew, was the Tupperware, the cold turkey, the acceptable sacrifice offering. I opened the window. The rush of freezing air hit my face, smelling of damp pavement and distant wood smoke. "Oh, Tori!" he shouted, squinting up at me. He looked smaller than I remembered. "Tori, come down. Your mother is in the car. We've got the leftovers. She's still a little upset about the spoons, but we can talk about it." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tucked me in every night for 10 years, but who hadn't spoken a single word in my defense for 20. He was holding that bag like a peace treaty, but it wasn't peace. It was a leash. "I don't want it, Dad," I called down. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. "What? It's the honey-baked ham you like. And the stuffing. Come on, don't be difficult. People are watching. Always the optics. Always the neighbors." "I said I don't want it," I repeated. "And I don't want the Friday leftovers anymore. I'm not a stray dog you can feed when the real guests are gone." "Tori, for God's sake," he sighed, that familiar sound of weary disappointment. "You're making a scene over a seating arrangement. It was one dinner. It wasn't one dinner, Dad. It was 30 years of being the person who doesn't get a chair. You can keep the turkey. Give it to Victoria. I'm sure she'll need it when her influential friends realize she can't cook." I saw the car door open. My mother stepped out. She didn't look up at me. She stayed by the door, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive wool coat, her face a mask of frozen indignation. "Robert, let's go," she barked. "If she wants to act like a child, let her starve." My father looked at the bag in his hand, then up at me. For a split second I saw it, a flash of genuine regret, a realization that the bridge was finally, truly on fire. But then, true to form, he turned. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say he loved me. He just walked back to the car, tossed the bag of cold food into the back seat, and drove away. I watched the red taillights vanish around the corner. I grabbed my coat. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, or what was left of the weekend, I was going to do it somewhere with actual food, with light, with life. I just had to find a restaurant that was still open. I walked out of my apartment, but I didn't head for the bistro. I walked 3 blocks over to the park. The snow was pristine here, untouched. I sat on a bench near the frozen pond and watched, a young couple teaching their toddler how to slide on the ice. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, ready to delete another tirade from my sister. But it was an email. It was from an estate lawyer I didn't recognize. The subject line read, regarding the estate of Helen Ruth Sterling. Ruth, my godmother. A woman my mother had written off decades ago because Ruth had been too loud, too opinionated, and too independent. I hadn't seen her since I was 12, but she had sent me a book every year for my birthday, always with a note, for the girl who sees the world. Don't let them dim your light. I opened the email with trembling fingers. Dear Tori, as per the final wishes of Helen Ruth Sterling, we are contacting you regarding the transfer of the Sterling Flower Farm and the associated residential property in Vermont. I sat on the bench, the cold seeping through my jeans, reading the words over and over. Ruth hadn't just left me a house. She had left me an exit. The email from the lawyer felt like a lifeline thrown from a shore I didn't know existed. While my biological family was arguing over silver spoons and seating charts, a woman who had been a ghost in my life for 15 years had been watching me. She had seen the light I was trying so hard to keep from flickering out. I didn't call my mother. I didn't tell Victoria. I called Marcus. 2 weeks later, the sleet of the city was replaced by the crisp, biting air of the Green Mountains. Marcus helped me load the last of my life, mostly books, my drawing table and my grandmother's silver, into a rented van. He'd spent the last fortnight helping me pack, his presence a steady, quiet hum of support. You're really doing it, he said, leaning against the back of the van. His breath hitched in the cold air, a white plume of reality. I have to, I said, looking up at my apartment window. It looked small now, insignificant. If I stay here, I'll just be waiting for the next phone call. The next time they need something from me, I need to go somewhere where I'm the first person through the door. Vermont is beautiful this time of year, he said, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were warm against my skin. I might have to come check on the landscaping. See if your flower farm needs a professional eye. I'd like that, Marcus. I really would. The drive north was a literal shedding of skin. Every mile marker felt like a pound of guilt dropping off my shoulders. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Sterling Flower Farm, the sun was dipping behind the peaks, painting the sky in bruised purples and defiant golds. The house was a rambling, white farmhouse, with a wraparound porch and a chimney that looked like it had stories to tell. Waiting on the porch were two people I didn't recognize. A woman with a crown of silver hair and a hand-knit cardigan stepped forward. Beside her stood a man with a gentle face and eyes that crinkled at the corners. You must be Tori, the woman said. Her voice was like a warm blanket. I'm Eleanor. Ruth was my dearest friend. And this is my husband, Richard. We've been looking after the place until you arrived. I didn't realize anyone would be here, I stammered, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Ruth made us promise, Richard said, stepping down to help me with my bags. His grip was firm and protective. She said you'd spent enough time arriving at places where you weren't expected. We've got a fire going, and Eleanor made a pot of stew. I stepped into the house, and for the first time in my life, the air didn't feel thin. It smelled of cedar, dried lavender, and wood smoke. There was no tension in the walls. No golden child photos on the mantel. Over the next month, Eleanor and Richard became the parents I had only ever seen in movies. They didn't want anything from me. They didn't ask me to fix their technology or babysit their problems. They taught me how to prune the dormant, roses, and how to listen to the rhythm of the land. Eleanor sat me down one afternoon in the sunroom, a cup of tea between us. You know, she said, her eyes fixed on mine. Blood makes us related, but choice makes us family. Ruth chose you because she saw herself in you, the one who carries the water for everyone else, until her own well runs dry. You don't have to carry it anymore, Tori. The well is full here. I cried then. Not the quiet, polite tears I shed in the city, but deep, racking sobs that cleared out decades of being the strong, fun. Eleanor didn't tell me I was being dramatic. She just moved her chair closer and let me lean my head on her shoulder. My phone, which had been buzzing, with angry messages from Linda about abandoning my responsibilities, sat on the counter, silent and ignored. I had blocked them all, not out of anger, but out of a need for peace. Then one Tuesday morning, a car pulled into the gravel drive. It wasn't my parents'. It was a sleek black SUV. Victoria stepped out, looking wildly out of place in her designer coat and high-heeled boots. She looked at the farmhouse, then at me standing on the porch in my mud-caked boots and oversized flannel. Tori! She called out, her voice high and sharp. What on earth are you doing? Mom is frantic. She says you've joined some kind of cult. You need to come home right now. David's promotion party is this weekend. And I need you to handle the catering arrangements. The firm we hired canceled. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I didn't see a golden child. I saw a woman who was desperately trying to maintain a facade that I was no longer willing to prop up. I am home, Victoria, I said quietly. Don't be ridiculous. This shack? This isn't home. You're being selfish. You're breaking Mom's heart. I took a step forward, the wood of the porch creaking under my feet, a solid, grounded sound. No, I said. I'm finally keeping my own heart whole. You can tell Mom I'm not coming back. Not for the party. Not for the leftovers. Not ever. Victoria's face contorted. You can't do this. You're the one who takes care of us. Who's going to do it if you don't? That's for you to figure out, I said. As she stormed back to her car, Richard stepped out from the barn, a shovel in his hand. He didn't say anything, but he stood by the porch steps, a silent, steady sentry until her car disappeared down the road. You okay, kiddo? He asked. Yeah, I said, and a slow smile spread across my face. I think I'm better than okay. I walked inside to find Eleanor setting the table. She looked up and smiled. I put out 3 plates, she said. Marcus just called from the bottom of the hill. He said he brought some Maine maple syrup and a very determined look on his face. I looked at the table. 3 plates, each one intentional, each one chosen. I went to the drawer and pulled out the silver spoons my grandmother had left me. I polished them until they shone like mirrors, reflecting a woman I was finally proud to know. The maple syrup Marcus brought was sweet, but the look in his eyes when he saw me, standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, was sweeter. He didn't say much at first. He just took in the mud on my boots and the color in my cheeks, then handed me a heavy crate of supplies he'd brought from the city. Art paper, new brushes, and a single, perfect lemon tree in a ceramic pot. For the sunroom, he said, his voice low and steady. I figured every flower farm needs a little citrus. That winter was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. There were no frantic phone calls about holiday logistics. There were no acceptable sacrifice roles to play. Instead, there were long mornings in the barn with Richard, learning the history of the seeds Ruth had saved, and quiet afternoons with Eleanor, who taught me that a home is built on the safety of the people inside it, not the perfection of the table settings. Marcus stayed. What started as a visit turned into a partnership, one of shared dreams and quiet mornings. We spent the spring planting. My hands, once only used for clicking a mouse or serving others, became calloused and stained with the dark, rich earth of Vermont. I began to paint again, not for clients, but for myself. I painted the way the light hit the barn at 5 a.m. I painted Eleanor's hands as she kneaded bread. I painted the empty chair in my studio, knowing that now it was a choice, not an exclusion. 1 year after I left, I sat on the wraparound porch with a glass of iced tea. The Sterling Flower Farm was in full bloom, a riot of peonies, snapdragons, and the wild, defiant roses Ruth had loved. My phone buzzed on the railing. It was a notification from social media, a photo of my parents and Victoria at a country club brunch. They looked perfect, polished, and entirely strangers to me. I realized then that I didn't hate them. I just didn't belong to them anymore. I had stopped trying to fit into a seat that was never built for me. And in doing so, I had built a whole new house. Marcus walked out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a towel. He sat down next to me, his shoulder brushing mine. Thinking about the city? He asked. No, I said, leaning my head against him. The air smelled of rain on pavement, the kind that hits the earth and makes everything grow. I was thinking about the seat. What seat? The one I used to beg for, I whispered. I looked toward the garden, where Eleanor and Richard were walking together, pointing out the first of the summer lilies. I realized I don't need a seat at a table where I'm not seen. I'd rather stand tall in a field where I am. I've learned that healing isn't about the people who hurt you finally saying they're sorry. They might never say it. They might go to their graves, believing you were the one who ruined the day. Healing is about the moment you stop waiting for the apology and start living the life that makes the apology unnecessary. It's about finding the people who save you a seat without you ever having to ask. As the sun began to set over the green mountains, Marcus reached out and took my hand. His grip was steady, protective, and sure. Dinner's ready, he said. Eleanor and Richard are already inside. They saved us the best spots. I stood up. leaving the phone and the ghosts of the past on the porch. I walked into the light of the house, my house, and sat down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a backup. I was home. If you're watching this and you've been the scapegoat of your family, if you've been told you're too much or too sensitive, or always causing drama just because you dared to ask to be treated fairly, I want you to know something. It's not you. It never was. You deserve to be chosen. Not as a backup, not as a last resort, not as the acceptable sacrifice when someone else's comfort is at stake. Chosen first. Chosen fully. Chosen without conditions. Family isn't blood. Family isn't obligation. Family isn't people who share your DNA but treat you like a burden. Family is the people who show up. The people who see you crying alone and invite you to their table. The people who open their hearts and their homes and make you officially, permanently, undeniably theirs. I spent 29 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. And then I spent 2 years learning what love actually looks like. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It helps more people find these stories when they need them most. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far this story reaches. And if you want more stories like this, check the description. I've linked some of my favorites there. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen.